Believe it or not, this is the 6th consecutive year I've done a rundown on the top 10 games of the year, and while it's a far cry away from the Game Awards, you also don't have to sit through a 10-minute speech from Christopher Judge before getting into it, so there's that. All jokes aside, let's find out which ones made the cut for 2022. Starting us off at number 10 is The Quarry. 2015's Until Dawn was one of my favourite interactive story games. Then the developer Supermassive Games began putting all their efforts into smaller titles under the Dark Pictures anthology umbrella, which certainly weren't bad, but didn't reach the same heights. The Quarry, on the other hand, feels far more fleshed out, with a fantastic setting, great visuals, and enough twists and turns along the way to keep me engaged. One gripe I do have with the game is that the creatures resemble those from Until Dawn far too much, and I think they could have been a lot more imaginative with their designs, but that aside, The Quarry is a great time. Who would have guessed a Need for Speed game would be so good, when they usually fall within the realm of mediocrity, and yet Unbound really does break the series' past boundaries. The gimmick this time around is various visual effects while driving, and although they add nothing to the fundamental gameplay, they do provide an extra sense of style and exhilaration to each race that works well and looks particularly good at night. Story-wise, it's nothing to write home about, and ultimately I find Forza Horizon 5 to be a better open-world arcade racer, but I was pleasantly surprised by how solid of a game Unbound is. I really enjoyed my time with it, and I hope they use it as a framework for future entries in the series. And number 8 is the third entry in the Xenoblade Chronicles series. I really liked the first game, and while I enjoyed certain elements of the second, overall I couldn't quite get into it in the same way, not helped by the fact I was frequently finding the map hard to navigate. Thankfully I really clicked with the latest entry, which does a great job of tying together 1 and 2. Gameplay wise, it sticks mostly to the series' tried and true formula, but adds a fusion mechanic that feels a bit like the one from Tales of Cestiria, albeit better executed. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is an extremely solid JRPG and pushes the Switch to its limit. And number 7 is Return to Monkey Island. I have never played or even seen anything outside of a few snippets of the previous Monkey Island games, so when I went into the latest entry, I really didn't know what to expect from the story or the gameplay, but in spite of that I was quickly sucked in. Even though I didn't have any knowledge of the prior events, it did a great job of introducing me to the world and characters. What I was familiar with, however, was the controversy surrounding the change of its art style, which looks a bit like an abstract painting from Picasso, but I really like it. It's unique, expressive, and gives the whole game a ton of character that rounds out its great tone and humour. And number 6 is A Plague Tale Requiem, which continues the story of Amicia and Hugo. With Hugo still afflicted with a curse known as the Macula, which allows him to control the plague of rats, but which is also slowly killing him, Amicia is in a desperate race against time. In comparison to the first, we get a far darker story. No longer is she scared and innocent, she's angry, vengeful, and ready to kill anyone she needs to. Gameplay wise, there's still plenty of parallels with The Last of Us, but it does enough to differentiate itself. Not to mention looks incredible, especially coming from a fairly small developer. There were definitely some performance issues at launch. My RTX 3080 really struggled with it at times, but these seem to have been largely polished out, leaving a tense, enthralling adventure, even if it does get a little too carried away with its supernatural elements. And number 5 is Tunic, which on the surface looks very reminiscent of the 2019 remake of Zelda Link's Awakening, but as you delve into it, you realise its gameplay is more firmly rooted in that of a Souls game, providing a challenging experience which will have you on the edge of your seat that you wouldn't expect from a title with such cutesy visuals. Although it's a small aspect, one thing I really like is its help menu, which is designed like an instruction manual straight from the early 90s that hit me with a wave of nostalgia. I went into the game expecting a light-hearted Zelda clone, but was pleasantly surprised there was a whole lot more to it. Coming in at number 4 is Stray. I was always intrigued by Stray's neon cyberpunk aesthetic, but prior to the game coming out, I didn't expect to enjoy it quite as much as I did. Blue 12 Studio completely nailed the controls of embodying a cat, exploring and platforming around environments is completely effortless, and interacting with all the robot inhabitants to uncover the next step is always interesting. The game is short at only 3 to 4 hours, and the ending does fall quite flat in my opinion, which is the only element I was a little let down by, but the lead up to it is fantastic, and controlling a cat is such a refreshing change of pace from pretty much everything else on the market. While it's a straightforward game, it looks incredible at times and boasts a ton of charm few will appreciate. As we move into the top 3, we have Horizon Forbidden West. Horizon Zero Dawn was one of my favourite games and also one of the best looking on the PS4, so I was extremely excited to see what they could do with the sequel, and Guerrilla Games certainly didn't disappoint. In many regards it's quite similar to the first, but refined on almost all fronts, with tighter combat, especially melee combat, almost twice as many machines to fight, and a more varied, interesting map to explore. Whilst the original looked fantastic, one of the major aspects that stood out was facial animations were quite stiff, and this is one area that's been majorly improved this time around. Forbidden West isn't perfect, but it's a superb sequel that firmly solidifies the Horizon series as one of PlayStation's best, and I enjoyed every second of my 60-hour playthrough. Taking spot number 2 is none other than Elden Ring. After creating so many Souls-like games since 2009, it was only natural that From Software adapt the genre into an open world. Open worlds are not new by any means, but the way FromSoft have handled it is extremely impressive. It could have felt like an empty wasteland, but instead is a huge map full of interesting locations to discover, secrets to find, and lore to uncover. Even after 90 hours I was still finding plenty of new things, and despite a lot of painful deaths to nail-biting bosses, I never once felt tired or bored of the experience. Elden Ring shows every other game how to handle world building and exploration, and I really can't speak highly enough about it. It's a triumphant evolution of the Souls-like games. And that of course leaves us with the Game of the Year for 2022, which goes to God of War Ragnarok. 2018's God of War was easily the best game of the last generation in my opinion, and that begged the question of how Sony Santa Monica could possibly top it, but somehow they've pulled it off. The story is phenomenally told, perfectly concluding Kratos and Atreus' current saga, the actors' performances are unrivaled, the soundtrack is one of the best I've heard in any game, and the gameplay is improved in all the right ways. So what makes God of War Ragnarok better than Elden Ring? For me it's the impact it leaves and the emotions it makes you feel when the credits roll that few games rarely, if ever, accomplish. In an industry where expectations are often not met, it didn't just meet them, but far exceeded them. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe and hit the bell icon for a notification each time I upload new content. Thanks for watching, and I'll speak to you in the next video.